I think we're going to get started. Thankfully, I can actually be at NASI this morning. The snow separated me from greeting you yesterday morning. I'm Lisa Mensah. I have the pleasure of serving as the chair of the board of the National Academy of Social Insurance. And in my day job, I'm at the Aspen Institute, where I am the executive director of the Initiative on Financial Security. I'm also out of juice for my BlackBerry. If anybody has a curve and wants to share their charger, I'd love to see you after this session. So this is one of those fun things. We're going to try a debate style. We may still get to questions from you, but we're mixing it up, and we're doing a debate that I think could only happen at NASI, and that's high praise from the Aspen Institute, where we love debates and conferences. And the reason is because this is a debate amongst NASI members and peoples. It's subtly in all of our discussions around Social Security, but we're going to splay it out, and we've asked our wonderful debaters to help us today on this deep question of more savings or more Social Security. And we're looking at two strategies for retirement security. That's our topic today. And usually the retirement folks are on one side in one set of rooms in Washington, and the Social Security folks are on one side in Washington. So NASI, we are all here in the same room, and I think that's going to enhance our discussions. So, and we are pressed because Secretary Sebelius is coming for our right after this. So I'm going to be the timekeeper here, assisted by my colleagues at NASI. But we really are going to press through and try to do a real, Women League of Voters style debate, where I try to give you, both of you, a chance to switch off. So let me tell you who's here with me on this stage, and you really should know them and probably already do. To my direct left is Mark Warshawsky. He's a member of the Social Security Advisory Board, as well as a director of retirement research at Towers Watson. Mark is an expert on pensions, Social Security, insurance, and healthcare financing. And at Towers Watson, he oversees the research activities related to employer-sponsored retirement programs. From 2004 to 2006, Mark Warshawsky served as Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy at the Treasury Department. And during his tenure, he played a key role in the Pension Protection Act of 2006 and was also involved extensively in the Social Security reform proposals. You really should read all of the rest of Mark's bio, and since we're talking professors, he's a native of Chicago, and he received his PhD in economics from Harvard and a BA from Northwestern. So Mark, welcome to the table, welcome to this debate. Next to Mark is Nancy Altman. Nancy has had a 35-year background in areas of private pension, Social Security. She's currently the co-director of Social Security Works, and also the chair of the board of directors of the Pension Rights Center, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the protection of beneficiary rights. She's the author of The Battle for Social Security, From FDR's Vision to Bush's Gamble. I read it, great book, from 1983 to 1989. She was on the faculty of Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and taught courses on private pensions as well as Social Security. I think an interesting fact, she was Alan Greenspan's assistant as he was as he chaired the bipartisan commission that developed the 1983 Social Security Amendment. So once again, we have someone with deep expertise. Nancy also has another role. She's also on our board at the National Academy, and she was part of the founding group of that founded the National Academy 25 years ago. She's a graduate of Radcliffe and of the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and really better bios for your reading. So thank you all. No volume on mine or on anybody's. I'm going to sit at that one soon, so speak in to the mic. We'll try. Mic does work. Okay, I will try, and soon I'll be sitting down. So, and we'll put this, so you all know what the title is. It's Two Strategies for Retirement Security. The way we're going to do this is I have 3 debate questions for Mark and for Nancy. And I'm going to be able to switch off between who leads on this. And in most cases, we have time for a rebuttal on each of those. So Nancy and Mark, bear with me. Mark, you're going to be leading off. And our first question really comes from our title. And I want you to imagine that we had a new dollar to spend. So, putting aside other debates, if we had a new dollar to spend, and on which approach, more Social Security or more tax incentives to save, do you see as the more promising approach to spend that extra dollar, that new dollar, in order to enhance retirement security? And Mark, you are going to go first with 3 minutes of response.
Thank you for inviting me to this debate and to the conference. I very much appreciate it. When we had actually we ourselves had, Nancy and I had actually quite spirited debate even on the question, so some weeks ago. And my response to the question, and I will still be my response, is the question is a little too theoretical for my taste, because of course we have programs both on the pension side and on the retirement plan side and on Social Security that are all underfinanced. So any marginal dollar that might exist basically has to be spent one way or the other to these programs to even get to the current levels, and that I think is quite doubtful. So on the Social Security side, I would say that there's some very natural adjustments that can be made that are sort of follow the natural course of the economy and the labor force, particularly as people work longer and as more people are in the labor force than were in the past. I think there can be some very small changes that can be made on the Social Security side that would put it on a secure and fair footing without any necessary raising of taxes. On the pension side, I'm very concerned about, in fact, an increase in payroll tax rate increases or extending the payroll maximum taxable payroll, because I think that would lead to a decrease in replacement rates and personal savings, pension savings. A colleague of mine, Gabo Peng, and I have an article in the December 2009 tax notes where we lay out an argument and an analysis which shows exactly that an increase in the payroll tax rate would lead pari passu to a decrease in personal savings. I think, if anything, what we need more of in the United States is less dependence on borrowing, less dependence on debt financing in all aspects of our economic work, and I think an increase in the savings rate is exactly what is called for. And I think that needs to be fairly shared, so that if there are changes that need to be made on Social Security, I think that all the changes that need to be made, they need to be small changes, but they need to be fairly shared among all the constituencies, so that no one individual group bears the majority of the burden unfairly. There's some research that was done by John Carl Scholes at the University of Wisconsin, which showed that current retirees, people who were born 1931 to 1941, have done very well. He showed that more than 80% saved at or above optimal levels. Any undersaving that did occur was very modest. It was not associated with people with lower incomes. If anything, the people who did do any undersaving were singles as opposed to married couples, so that the current retired generation has been quite successful. And they've experienced very good economic times in the past, and therefore I think they also need to be part of any shortfall financing in Social Security.
Thanks, Mark. Nancy, you want to take the next 3 minutes?
Yes. To answer the question about an additional dollar or Mark's modification, if you were going to take a dollar away, the question is, I think to answer it, you really have to understand clearly the difference between insurance and savings. When you buy a house, the mortgage company does not ask you to set up a savings account in case your house burns down. They ask you to buy fire insurance. When you buy a car, you're required to have insurance, not a savings account in case you have an accident. If you're concerned about, if you're prudent and you want to make sure if you die, your dependents are cared for, you have life insurance. You don't set up your own individual account. Same for disability. I have a 23-year-old daughter. If she came to me and said, I'd like to have I plan to retire at age 68, and I'd like to have 70% of my final pay. How much should I save this year and going forward? I think it is impossible to answer that question. I don't know whether and no one knows whether she'll have steady employment, whether she'll become unemployed and in fact have to dissave. There are all kinds of imponderables that are uncertainties when you're focused on any individual. Will she die at 58 so she doesn't need to save anything? Will she die at 69 so she'll only need 1 year of saving? Will she live to 100 and she'll need substantial savings? What you need in that case is group insurance. And in addition, there are all kinds of things she's going to have to be saving for that are much more predictable. So for a contingent expense, such as the ones I've mentioned, I think what is needed is group insurance. The group insurance you need is in the form of a defined benefit plan. We have a universal defined benefit plan that is completely portable, that covers very hard to cover workers, that's extremely efficient, much more efficient than any individual account, that pools risk across the entire population. It's called Social Security. So if we're concerned about retirement security of the American people, it seems to me our money is best spent on Social Security. Individuals can choose to save on their own with or without tax subsidies. I cannot, and no one in this room can choose to set up an individual defined benefit plan.
Mark, 2 minutes to rebut.
Sure. Nancy, I certainly appreciate your point about sort of insurance versus savings, and certainly certain contingencies are very well served by insurance as opposed to saving, and I'm very sympathetic to that. So, for example, long-term care, the need for long-term care coverage, I think, is an insurance need, an insured need. It's not a savings need because it's probably less than, basically 50% probability, sort of where there's significant expenses. I would say, though, that retirement, although there certainly are uncertainties, and length of life is a very significant uncertainty, where, again, I fully agree with you that insurance, the life annuity, is an absolutely appropriate mechanism to use in conjunction with saving for retirement and retirement plans. But I think retirement, and I think that one thing that makes Social Security make sense is that it is fairly universal. In other words, the need is not maybe 100%, some people do not survive into retirement, but universal, close to it. And therefore, I think there are mechanisms that, since it is nearly universal and nearly certain, savings is appropriate for that type of contingency. I'll talk a little bit more about defined benefit plans. I'll fully agree with you on that it is a very nice feature, both in a social insurance program and in a private savings program, and that you cannot get it. It doesn't make sense to get it as an individual program, but an employer-sponsored defined benefit plan is a good thing to have, and it's a shame that they have been going away. I have actually one modest proposal in that regard, which maybe we'll discuss later in the later questions, which I think would be very helpful in revitalizing defined benefit plans.
Nancy, 2 minutes to remark.
Death is 100% certainty, and yet we have life insurance. I think that there are many uncertainties that require with retirement. I mean, longevity is one, the longevity uncertainty. Another is investment uncertainty. Individuals have limited time horizons for which they can invest. They may have to retire in a down market. A group program like Social Security has an unlimited time horizon and can ride the ups. If it were a diversified fund, it would ride up the ups and downs of the market. In this case, it's more conservatively invested in treasury bonds. It's got other, with an individual account, you have, in addition to bearing the whole risk on an individual, you have to make your own management decisions. most people are not professional, spend all their time as professional managers. If you have a group fund, you have the efficiency of group management. And there are, I could go on and on. There are a whole host of advantages. Savings are great. It's valuable for people to save. It's not clear that you need tax subsidy to do that, because a lot of that is simply shifting savings from people. Bill Gates is going to save whether he gets a tax break or not. There are shifts that go on. And of course, the higher income you are, the more able you are to save. But to me, if we're talking about the retirement security of the American people and government's role in it, it seems unquestionable Social Security is the answer, which is why it has proven so successful, has been so important. Not only it's extremely important as an anti-poverty program, but the idea of it is to prevent poverty in the first place, that you need to have wage insurance and disability insurance in the case of that, and so forth. So I think that's the better approach.
Thank you. We're going to go on. So my next question is going to turn from the specifics of which system you would want to see more investment in to how to pay for it. So let's go back to think about additional supports or additional money into either side, the Social Security side or the private retirement savings side. Nancy, I want to come to you first and say, how do you propose that we would pay for additional Social Security?
Well, the tax expenditure for private retirement vehicles is one of the largest. I think healthcare is larger, but employee benefits is the largest. So that's clearly one place if we're thinking about if we have to take money away. But I wouldn't do that. What I would do, there are enormous number of ways. I would, if I wanted, which I would think we should do, is expand Social Security's benefits and take care of its shortfall. There are all kinds of ways. I would go for progressive revenue. Partly we've had this income inequality in this country that has caused the shortfall to occur. And it also, there's the legacy debt that shouldn't be paid for on the backs of workers. There's the Dean Baker has talked about the financial speculation tax. If that were dedicated to Social Security, no solvency, you could raise benefits across the board. You could have a tax on adjusted gross income over $1 million. That would take care of all the shortfall. If you made it 11%, you could raise benefits. There are lots of proposals in NASI's brief about, those two are not in the NASI brief, but there are many others that are in NASI's brief about adequate benefits, adequate financing, including adjusting the maximum taxable wage base, a rate increase way out in the future, treating salary reduction plans the same as 401k plans. There are many, many approaches that could be taken. The important part is that this is a political decision. This is a highly affordable program. At its most expensive, the whole shortfall is about 0.6% of gross domestic product. At its most expensive, Social Security will cost 6%, 6.1% of GDP, which is less than most industrialized countries in Europe and Japan are spending on their social insurance programs today. This is a time when our population is going from 12% of people over 65 to 20%. It makes sense that that more goods and services go to a larger part of the population. And as I say, it's a very, very modest increase right now.
Thank you. Mark, again, the question is, how do you propose to pay for your system?
Thank you. I had a proposal which was scored by the Social Security actuary in 2008. It's up on the Social Security website. Since then, I've had some further thinking about some changes that can be made to it. But let me give you some of the items which were included in the proposal, which were in fact pay-fors, if you will. One is to increase the retirement age. As I indicated before, I think that's a natural change that can be made in Social Security because it's a natural adjustment which is already occurring in terms of people working later and people being healthier. So I think that's almost if you will, a organic change which can be made. I would change the computation period for calculating benefits from currently 35 years to 40. Again, that's a natural organic change as people work longer, and I also believe that's fair, that it's fair to longer career people as opposed to people really like ourselves who go to school for so many years and then don't necessarily work as long as others. I would revise the COLA so that it reflects an accurate measure of inflation, and there's been very extensive research done that by the BLS as to what a more accurate measure of the COLA would be. I would increase the early eligibility age. That doesn't necessarily do much to saving money or pay for, but it is again natural in terms of the organic nature of the economy as people work longer. I think a very important aspect is that we do have one system, and I agree that it's retirement, disability, and so that the disability conversion needs to occur at the early eligibility age as opposed to the retirement age, because otherwise we have an incentive for people to claim for disability as opposed to retirement. I would include all state and local government employees in the system. This is a revenue raiser. And two final items. One is to divert income taxes that are paid on benefits to the Social Security Trust Fund, and to tax benefits according to normal tax principles, the way private pensions are paid. I think these are all sort of fair. They're sort of bear the burden evenly, and I think would be pretty close to covering the whole.
Nancy, a minute to rebut?
This is supposed to be the rebuttal.
This is the rebut of Mark's pay-fors.
One place we agree, although I think we may disagree on the specifics, and that is, I think the cost of living adjustment should also, I agree that it should be made more accurate. I think it should be made more accurate by looking at what seniors and people with disabilities pay, which the Bureau of Labor Statistics does with their Consumer Price Index E, CPIE, for the elderly, which actually has gone up faster than the CPIW, which is used in the current law. I believe that Mark was probably referring to what is being talked about a lot around town, the chain CPI, which is more accurate if you're talking about the marginal tax rates and people of upper income who can substitute, but not accurate for seniors where a disproportionate and people with disabilities where a disproportionate amount of their money goes on spending where they don't have much substitution, health insurance or health costs, rent or mortgages, food, and so forth, because they're already not spending much on food. So even that substitution within categories is hard. On the others, the retirement age increase is simply a 7% across-the-board benefit cut for every year that it is adjusted. It's a mathematical point. So all of these are ways that would reduce retirement security, and if that's what we're going to do, I would look at the tax expenditure on private pensions. I would leave Social Security's benefit levels at least where they are.
Mark, you have a minute to rebut.
Okay. With regard to tax expenditures on private pensions, I think it's very important. This is maybe a somewhat technical point, but it is an important point that they're really a bit of apples and oranges, because when tax expenditures are calculated for private pensions, they're calculated based on what is being deducted from income tax. And because usually those expenditures are growing, what isn't fully accounted for is that taxes will be paid in the future on income which is drawn from the pension. And this is very different than the tax expenditures, let's say, on the mortgage or on health care, where those expenditures, those deductions are taken off the income tax, but there's never any future income that is taxed. So it's a very, very different animal, and it's really, I would say, almost unfair to sort of include them in the same breath. I think with regard to Social Security taxes, I think including a lot of other sources of tax revenue into Social Security, I think does make it more of a welfare type program. And, just hearkening back to the keynote speaker earlier this morning, I think one of the logics is to sort of relate benefits to contributions, and I think I have sympathy for that, and therefore introducing a lot of other sources of revenues, I think, breaks that bond. So I don't think I would favor it. And with regard to one point, maybe to conclude in terms of raising the tax cap, for example, the Commission's proposal to raise it from the current $106,800 to what eventually would be in current dollars about $200,000. That I think also is a very bad policy, and it's very unfair, because if we have seen some worsening of income distribution in the United States in the last 30, 40 years, it's not that group. In fact, they also have been hard hit. They experience big increases in health care expenditures, and they're not going to get any subsidies from the health care reform.
Okay, we're on the
all
end of the
right, great.
rebuttal.
Okay, thank you.
I think you got your point. All right, I'm going to go to our third question. I promised you 3, and I'm going to ask you both to stay, you, Mark, in the system of private retirement savings, and Nancy, you in the system of Social Security. And I want to come to how both of you might treat the question of targeting. And I want to ask you, and I'm going to start with you, Mark, if you had additional dollars, I know it's hard to think that way, but I'm pushing the economist here, but if you had additional spending and you could target them within, in your case, the private retirement system, where would you advocate for targeting additional resources within the private retirement savings system? And
Okay, sure.
Take 3 minutes.
One which I alluded to before was the defined benefit plan, and this actually I don't think would even be scored as a revenue loser. This very well may be a revenue gainer, although I have, despite many repeated requests to the officials to sort of confirm or deny my hypothesis, I haven't been successful. But it's at least debatable as to whether it's actually a loser. And this is in the nature of the defined benefit system. I think one of the very bad policy decisions that were made, and it was done as a true political, almost panic situation, was the excise tax, which was put on excess pension asset reversions. I won't go through the whole history of it, but I think the important analytical and policy point is that it makes the employer bear all the risk and really get no possibility of any gain. And that is a bet that employers increasingly don't want to take. And I think you could have sensible tax rates. That current excise tax is 50%, which is confiscatory. You could lower it to 15, 20, even 12%, which would be a fair tax. And I think it would make a defined benefit plan at least an even playing field type instrument. And I don't think it would cost money. And the reason why is because the government is collecting zero revenue on this tax currently. And I'll note, I'll even invoke the Pension Rights Center, that in 2007 they published a book called Conversations on Coverage. And in one of the proposals, that in fact was a proposal to reduce that tax rate. I think another area is wage indexing compensation limits in the private pension retirement system. Currently, they're all price indexed. And over time, wages increase faster than prices. I think we all know that here. Social Security is a wage index program. And I think sort of logically, in terms of the logic of the system, private pensions and Social Security need to work together. Even sometimes literally they are integrated in plans, Social Security and pensions, and so it's very awkward when you have one being indexed by prices, the other indexed by wages. I would wage index those various limits, and actually that would make the system sort of more logical in terms of where on the income distribution the system works together. I'll say one more item, which is actually part of my Social Security reform proposal. I think I fully acknowledge that there are the pay-fors that I've indicated would cut scheduled benefits, which currently are not financed. But I would say that for the lower income group, I think we do need to create a system of accounts in the United States, voluntary add-on accounts. but it needs to be targeted to those that, and in my proposal was those that earn less than $40,000 a year, with their making a contribution, the government making a match on a sliding scale, and that would allow us to repeal the savers credits, and that's true targeting.
Thank you for sticking. I heard three ideas,
Yes.
in 3 minutes. You've done well. Nancy, I'm coming to you next with the same question of targeting, but for you within the Social Security system, if you had to
And
target.
a footnote, I would love to be able to rebut the point, and I won't take the time now on tax expenditures because it is apples and apples. But in terms of, and if there's a question, I'll answer it at that point, or if we have another minute. But in terms of it depends how much money I had to spend. Clearly, I would look first at areas of where there's disproportionate levels of poverty. I think after a lifetime of work, long-wage earner should have an adequate benefit above poverty. Part of Social Security's genius has been to balance adequacy of benefits with fairness of benefits, and I think it's done a very good job of that, but I think the adequacy piece could be improved. Again, a lot of work has been done on the special minimum. It was something the Bowles-Simpson Commission had in it. It should be noted that the special minimum, as they have it, the very lowest earners, only 20% would benefit from it, but at least that is good. Another would be there's disproportionate poverty among women at the high end. Target that. There have been a number of proposals on the table to do that. But if I had the resources, if I were king or queen, I would have an across-the-board increase, because our retirement security in the future is going to be less adequate than it is now. The era of private sector defined benefit plans went with unions and the shift from manufacturing, the decline in unions and the shift from manufacturing to service industries. They were never portable, so they were good for long-range age workers, but they were not good for mobile workers. They had lots of insecurities. We need the Pension Benefits Guarantee Corporation, another inefficiency. All of that is so even if we could restore private sector defined benefit plans, we're better off with a public defined benefit system, Social Security. In addition, the defined contributions of 401ks have proven very inadequate. We saw the problem with the downturn, but even before that, I've forgotten now the account balances, but I think the average account balance was somewhere around $50,000 or $75,000, which would not buy you much of an annuity, certainly wouldn't last through the average life expectancy. So I think both targeted and across the board increases are called for if we're really committed, and it has the added advantage of improving life insurance. Social Security provides more life insurance to the nation than all private life insurance combined and disability insurance, and it would improve automatically overnight. You wouldn't have to wait a generation. Improved retirement security for all Americans.
Okay, Nancy, I am going to give you a chance to ask Mark a
this is
question
good.
that's been burning on your mind.
And this one we were told ahead of time, so this is not off the top of my head. Mark, some have opposed expanding Social Security, not because they think it's not efficient or not because they think individual accounts are fairer or anything like that, but because they think that government really does not have a role to play in providing middle-class insurance. It was something Theda talked about in the session before this, that government, it's not an appropriate role of government, that individuals shouldn't be forced to purchase government-provided life insurance, disability insurance, and old age annuities, even if the government provided it, and that they especially object to the redistributive nature of Social Security, which some redistribution is a part of any kind of group insurance, but Social Security, as everyone in this room knows, consciously redistributes through its benefit formula from more affluent workers to lower income workers, and so they object on those grounds. Does that have anything to do with your your view that Social Security should be scaled back in the ways you've enumerated, and that private accounts, private individual savings should have more tax preferences?
You're asking actually a fairly personal question, or maybe a philosophical question, a question of my own views of the appropriate role of government. And when one asks a personal question, it is a little uncomfortable, I will admit, because I'm mainly an economist and an analyst, and there you try to avoid those philosophical questions. But I think to answer your question fairly and honestly, the answer is yes. That it is a question of the appropriate role of government. It is a question of the appropriate role of the private sector, of the individuals, the individual autonomy, the freedom that individuals have. I think there's also an element, a little bit of historical context. Obviously, Social Security was created right out of the Depression. I think it was created also at a time when the private sector just simply didn't have the mechanisms and the means and the institutions and instruments and policies and so on in place to provide retirement income in a efficient manner. I think a lot has changed since 1935, 1939 in that regard, and we have gotten enormously efficient in these areas, and particularly for the middle class. I think that I know there are statistics that are often cited about that X percent of the population, retired population, depends X percent on Social Security. At the Social Security Advisory Board, we looked a little into those statistics, and there are some problems with those statistics because they're based on, not on administrative records, but they're based on surveys, so people have recollections which aren't necessarily accurate. But even aside from the statistics, I fully believe that for the vast majority of people that they would save for retirement on their own if provided the right framework and the right mechanisms, also the incentives to do so. So I guess, yeah, the answer is Nancy, yes.
Mark,
It is philosophical.
We're going to give you the same opportunity to either stay in the domain of philosophy or else, but a question for Nancy from
Okay,
you.
this is actually a little bit, I think, closer to the domain of politics, and it's a three-part question. Some say that there is no Social Security financing problem. I actually don't know if Nancy believes that or not, but some do say it, that Social Security does not contribute to the deficit or government debt, and the trust fund is real. So here's the three parts of the question. But doesn't the government now have to borrow money from foreigners, the Chinese, to pay Social Security benefits? That's question number one. In official government statistics, and this includes Peter Orszag when he was head of the OMB, the Congressional Budget Office, when they talk about government obligations outstanding, they talk about marketable treasury securities. They exclude the trust fund. So what does that mean? In other words, are they being misleading to say that the trust fund doesn't really count? Or maybe do they really mean that the trust fund doesn't count, that Social Security can be changed and the trust fund is just accounting? And what about various other trust funds, both aside from Social Security, Medicare, the way that in the Health Care Reform Act, the money basically is counted twice, both for the Medicare trust fund and also to finance the new program. The new class program, the long-term care insurance, it's the same deal. It's sort of money counted twice. Do you believe that this has led to increased government spending or a lack of desire for reform without sufficient revenues?
Complex question. It was
much time
really
do I have?
three. I think we have a Secretary of HHS coming on quickly, but I did
Okay,
hear
well, let
three
me
parts.
just sort of hit some high points, because
Sure.
there's a lot in there, and this is actually a question near and dear to my heart as a lawyer. On your assumptions, I wouldn't say, I read the trustees' reports. I think the projections of their intermediate assumptions of a 1.92% shortfall taxable shortfall over 75 years is the best projection we have. So, but I would not call it a problem. I would call it a prudent management of an insurance program where you're going out over many, many years. And when you're going out 75 years, which is more than any private pension projects out, and it's actually more than most other countries project out. I think Germany's like 20 or 25 years. You are going to sometimes show long-range deficits. Sometimes you may show long-range surpluses, depending on the assumptions. And so it's a matter of prudence, and it's a maintenance. It's like, you know, Reagan Airport's going to need a new runway in 20 years, and we should be cognizant of that, not that it's a problem. In terms of the sort of the idea of the trust fund, it absolutely is real. I mean, there was a lawsuit in the 1980s when there was some monkeying around with it, where it's got, the fiduciaries have fiduciary responsibility, and some beneficiaries took them to court. Now, it got resolved before there was actually a judgment, but it certainly wasn't thrown out as a frivolous matter. It's a matter of legal standing. It is a trust which goes back thousands of years to, it's part of the Anglo-American system. Now, it does hold, what gets confusing, I agree, it holds U.S. treasuries backed by the full faith and credit. There'd be no question, I think, if it held stock market securities, that it had this independent life. There were so many questions. I do think that, I don't think Peter Orszag's being disingenuous or any of those people. I think if you're thinking about the government for fiscal policy, it makes sense to think of it as a kind of black box with money going in and money going out, and the interfund transactions aren't significant. But when you're thinking about the legality of it and the underpinning of this thing, these are contributions, Federal Insurance Contributions Act, that are dedicated to Social Security, which means Congress can spend income tax for any purpose limited only by the Constitution. For these funds, these have to be used for Social Security and for the administrative costs associated, for paying benefits and so forth. And so that is a legal distinction. That is not just kind of somebody's made up by fairy tale. That is a matter of law. And that, I mean, of course, the law can be changed, and the United States is a sovereign entity. But I don't think you would think that a private pension that held government obligations was somehow, or take another example, the state unemployment funds, if they're invested, I say I'm out of time, last quick point, and state unemployment funds that hold government obligations, absolutely, to pay those back, some of the same taxpayers, the taxpayers in that state and the taxpayers of the federal government will have to be taxed, or there'll have to be other borrowing. But that's no different from any other kind of borrowing that the government does and is then obligated. That's the whole idea of a bond.
Nancy and Mark, you have done great. We need to give you guys a hand. As you know, there is a beloved tradition of audience Q&A at NASI, and I have been informed we are really out of time, except because we were going to give you both a chance to summarize. Is there a burning audience question? Or could I go?
One quick question. Mark, especially, you seem to want to protect both defined benefit plans and extend Social Security to public sector who is not covered, and I agree. But right now we have a huge attack going on all over the country on public sector defined benefit plans. I just wondered how you would advise doing both things, or phase it in, do it now. How is it possible?
I will say, this goes back to my history with regard to the Pension Protection Act and private sector defined benefit plans. And this, I do believe, with regard to employers. Employers want, private employers want an accurate accounting, but they want a fair deal. And I think the same should apply to state and local governments.
All right, I am going to ask Mark if you will take a couple minutes and give us a final summation.
I will be very brief because I know we're very pressed for time. I think we can solve the retirement problem, and I do think it is a problem, a current problem, because I think on all accounts the great system that we've created, Social Security, retirement plans, pension plans, have been frayed. But I think we need to do it in an organic way, a natural way, without any massive changes in the system, and I think they can be done. I think I've outlined many steps whereby it can be done in a fair and in a moderate way, but I don't think we should delay. I think that it's one of the unique things about retirement plans, unlike, say, health plans, which are paying benefits out right at this very minute. It's its very nature, both in the private sector and in the public sector, very long-term benefits. And so I think we need to do it prudently, and I think we need to do it now because it will affect future generations.
Thank you, Mark.
And I'll try
Nancy?
to be equally brief. Social Security is, I think unquestionably, the most important part of and most successful part of our retirement income system. I think part of what is getting in the way these days and Congress has always acted very responsibly towards it. It has always, whenever it's raised benefits, it's raised the amount of revenue necessary to put it on a long-range financial, to pay for those benefits. I think what's gotten in the way in the last, since the Greenspan Commission, which so efficiently and effectively came up with a package that went through the normal legislative order, and Congress, but was well-tailored and crafted, was that there was widespread agreement on the basics, that we weren't going to relitigate first principles, that Social Security was a program that worked, that was very important to the American people, and should remain strong. There was not talk about making it privatized and telling people it wasn't affordable and saying there's a crisis now when the trust fund report shows that it's got a 1.92%, all benefits can be paid in full and on time for the next 27 years. So I think that to keep our retirement system strong, we need to have a debate that, to my mind, if we're going to go forward, it's got to be, let's reach agreement first on the goals before we start talking about the specifics. And let's recognize the will of the people, which was talked about in the first session. The American people overwhelmingly want the benefits of this program preserved, and I think that's what our politicians work for them and should listen to what they say.
Thank you, Nancy. Please join me in thanking both of our panelists. We took a risk on this debate, and you helped us, and by the quietness and attentiveness in the pre-lunch moment, I think you really helped us all on this topic. Thank you very much.